Hello, and welcome to this critical review. I'm Sarah. I'm a longtime writer with my bachelor's in English. I'm currently unpublished, but I will be launching the first book of my dark fantasy series as soon as I'm out of editing hell.
And I'm Jack. I'm a longtime writer and developmental editor with a bachelor's in neuroscience. My debut novel was Where the Lightning Goes, which you can find a link to below.
And I'm Jess. I am on hiatus as a writer, but I still really love books, and I'm very excited to read this book together with you all.
Here, we exclusively review the works of indie authors, and today we'll cover Eyes Wide Open by Jan Miklasiewicz. By way of reminder before we start, if you are the author or a friend or fan of this author, we do not recommend you watch this video. This will be an in-depth critique of the good and bad of this book, and it is intended to give potential readers a full view of the piece and help educate writers working on their own novels. As always, we will be covering 4 major areas, which you can find time-stamped below if you would like to jump forward. The first is judging the book by its cover, where we will give our impressions of the blurb and cover art blind. Next, we'll move on to the hook, which will focus on the first chapter, how it's doing getting us into the book, whether it matches the genre, and whether or not we would keep reading on our own. After that, we'll get into the bulk of our discussion with the book, where we'll cover plot, character arcs, and other details of the overall execution. And finally, we'll end on, not with a bang, but with where we'll discuss the ending. If at any time this book seems interesting to you, we do encourage you to pause and read it regardless of our experiences. Please do not review this author or this book without purchasing and reading it yourself. And of course, please do remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. If you would like to submit an unpublished first chapter or request a critical review of your own work, please check the description below for our email inbox.
All right, so welcome to Judging a Book by Its Cover. The first question, as always, is the genre clear? I do think it's pretty clear, looking at the front with red typing and a singular looking tired, afraid eye, that this is a horror. I would not question or think that it is any other genre.
Yeah, the genre is definitely clear. And I honestly think it's a pretty striking cover, too. Picking it up, you know exactly what you're getting into, and I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I agree. I think the eye in particular really gives that scared feeling. The title is not the most original in the world, but the lettering and the way it's kind of faded and the gritty graininess of the background, I think, really work together.
The graininess of the background reminds me of a VHS tape. So it makes me feel like this is going to be sort of if not a classic type of horror, then something that is supposed to take place decades before now. I will say that I agree the title itself is not catching and doesn't give me any particular feeling of, I wouldn't say horror based off of that. It doesn't evoke any particular emotion or imagination in me. That said, something I do really like about the cover is that if I saw this from across the room, I would go look at it.
Yeah. You might say it's eye-catching.
That's not a pun.
I thought I was going to bring the dad jokes.
All right. Target audience, I assume, is adult, just based off of the no-nonsense level of the cover.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't think I would be surprised if it were a different target audience, but my assumption is adult.
Yeah, I would definitely say that I agree with that.
I think I have a little bit of, existing bias from, the way books were for so many years. It's so, thin that it makes me think, younger audience just on the thickness, but that doesn't actually mean anything. That's just a lingering bias from, the book publishing industry has changed.
Yes. Well, and I think this is a novella, so just in general, that's going to change things a little bit. It's not a full-length novel.
So it is a novella, but at the same time, horrors are known for having a shorter length than other genres. 50,000 is around where a horror usually falls, not counting Stephen King.
Oh.
So
okay. So then that's just a me not reading horror thing more than anything else, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably closer to 30,000 than 50, but for a horror book, it's not that far out of the length. This is not a surprising thickness of book.
From just the looks of it, I would feel really bad if a child picked this up. So hopefully they don't make the same assumptions.
Okay, and for the back of the book.
Okay. Who's next? After waking a malignant force that's hell-bent on destroying them, the housemates at 13 Cromwell Lane are in a whole world of trouble. Worse still, there seems to be no way of stopping it. And as the body count rises and the deaths get ever more gruesome, the chances of survival start to look horribly slim. Set in an English university town in the early 2000s, this debut horror novella will entertain and appall you in equal measure.
Oh, there you go, Jack. You had it right on the kind of the time frame, late 90s, early 2000s,
Yeah.
back when VHS still ruled the world.
And I mean, that means it's a good cover to give me the impression of the time frame that it would be in.
Yeah, communicates the setting already. Although I will say there's not really an indication on there that it's like an English university town, which I'm not really dinging it for that. That setting could have probably been conveyed in it too if you were really looking to, get real fancy with the cover, but yeah.
I'm going to say it's not a great blurb. It's clear that we're doing some sort of haunting or demon summoning or some sort of supernatural force comes into dorm place, basically. But there's nothing specific to this book in any of the blurb. Housemates at 13 Cromwell Lane is the most specific they get. Malignant force could be any level of supernatural thing. Whole world of trouble, obviously it's a horror. No way of stopping it, that's always the assumption until we have to go find a way. It tells us that there is a body count, which you can toss a coin and decide whether that's going to happen in any horror. And then the chances of survival start to look horribly slim. They should look horribly slim from the beginning because we have a malignant force going around killing people.
Yeah.
None of this tells me anything to drag me into the book itself or to differentiate this from other books. There are no genuine specifics in this.
Yeah, it's probably pretty telling that my favorite bit was the will entertain and appall you in equal measure, which is not about the story itself.
Yeah. Whenever I was going through it, I guess for me, not being super familiar with the horror genre, it is not a genre I read at all. So every single thing I say is going to come from that I don't know much about it, kind of standpoint. But I will say the one thing I think it does well is it sort of promises to be like at least to me, a slasher, kind of the same way that I guess it comes across like it's being advertised to me by the back blurb the same way that every single like summer horror flick is.
Yeah, sorority slasher or like a camp slasher.
Yeah, something like that. And if that's what it is, you're right. I think it would be good if there was a little bit more differentiation. But if somebody's looking for a quick read slasher horror, novella, this is saying, that's exactly what this is. Go for it. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. I don't agree. Largely because if that were your target audience, then he needed to lean into that more. To go into the fact that, like, running around and you only have this many... Like, he doesn't mention our protagonists at all other than that they are housemates. So giving us what kind of slasher also sets the tone for it.
Yeah.
Because most of your classic horror slashers are either comedic or are super dark. And there's not really an in-between, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that does make sense. I think to the point of it being kind of a generic back blurb, one of the things that did stick out to me whenever we were just reading through it initially here was that the chances of survival start to look horribly slim. And I think to your point, my first question was for who? Like, so who is dying? And then whose chances of survival look horribly slim? You know what I mean? So it's just one of those things because there was a lack of specificity there. I don't really know who I'm rooting for. So it is this kind of generic, like...
And in a horror novel, then the question is who you're afraid for. And at this point, we're not afraid for anyone. Or we don't know if we're supposed to be afraid for a group, like we want the whole group to survive, or lovers, or a best friend, or just a main character. It's just that people aren't surviving. Something I will give it is that it says body count rises, deaths get ever more gruesome, we might die in this. That should be what happens in a book that's this thin. Because the reason that horror gets to be 50,000 words and less, is because maintaining the tension to make it a good story is incredibly difficult. People aren't built to uphold that level of adrenaline for that long. And so if you keep the tension too high, then eventually your readers just kind of go, I don't care, kill them. Like, just make it's I'm done. Whatever happens, happens. And so for longer books to work, it has to be really well done tension. If it's this short and a slasher, then people should be dying fairly quickly, and the stakes should be high because you don't have to control the tension that well for a shorter novel.
Yeah. And I think, like, the amount of words that you have for a blurb is very small, they're precious, and it's redundant to have the body count rises and the deaths get ever more gruesome, and then say the chances of survival start to look horribly slim. You could have used those words on giving us more character for the book.
Yeah.
Correct. And the author chose to only have basically one paragraph when he could have had 3. So it was a choice to make the words matter even more than they would have otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's true. And then make those words, unfortunately, more toward the generic end.
So off of the back of the book, I don't think I would buy this in the store, but if someone gave it to me, I would still read it. So far.
Yeah, not being an avid reader of the genre, if I were looking to pick up something that was a horror, this does seem very approachable to me because, again, like, from the outside, so it could be one of those things where this wouldn't appeal well to somebody within the genre, but for somebody who's looking to get into the genre, it might be something that would appeal to them more, because I was like, oh yeah, I kind of want to, like, it did kind of make me want to open the front cover and just take a peek inside and kind of see what was going on, maybe because it was so vague on the back, but it does make a couple of those promises of it's going to be a horror, it's going to be a slasher, there's going to be a malignant force. We do know those things. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds like the elements of a good summer horror flick if I were into such things.
It definitely feels accessible.
Yes. Jess, how would you feel about it?
Well, I am not a horror reader. If I was looking to pick up the horror genre, then, as you mentioned, it is a very accessible book. Honestly, the shortness of it would make me feel like even if I don't love it, it's not like it's going to take a whole lot of my time to read. I might as well give it a shot. But as someone who doesn't really read horror, I think that I just don't have as strong of an opinion on it.
There you go.
That's fair. All right, so let's pop it open. We'll just read the prologue.
Okay, so like I said, it doesn't really have a middle ground between actual slasher scary horror and comedy, and the prologue says comedy. We've got a couple of key comparisons in here, like he knows it in the same way that you know it's not safe to fart. It's a throwaway comedy line, and so I now expect this to be a slasher comedy, which does not come through on the cover or the back. So that's worth noting in terms of reader expectation. It does have a kind of classic start of comparing what you would do in a movie versus what you're actually doing. I do think that it's a unique take on the character going down, even though he knows something is terrible, almost as if that supernatural thing is pulling him down the steps. Because we have so many lines that are more comedic than they are horrific, it doesn't even attempt to really dwell in the tension of what walking, quote-unquote, willingly, without physical exerted force on you toward your death would really feel like or mean. And I think that could have been powerful. I'm interested to know going forward whether or not he leans more into the horror aspect or more into the comedy aspect, because currently the comedy is just in throwaway lines, which doesn't really give you that sense of we're supposed to laugh, or we're supposed to have a silly time or get drunk with this. But also, like I said, he doesn't even attempt to sit in that tension at all, and so the horror doesn't hit either. I just want to know where he ends up leaning toward in his tension or complete lack of tension.
Yeah, although I will say the narration itself seems a little bit on the comedic side as well, because it sort of pokes fun a lot at the kind of tropes, I guess. Like you were just saying about the he would be launching into a speech about how these things wouldn't work without bad decision making. But it's not a horror movie, and it's not a dream either, as far as he can tell. It's just these lines that have sort of this glib quality to them.
In another genre, they would be comedic relief.
Yeah. And it's one of those things. This is a prologue. We're handling the prologue separately because they're meant to be handled separately. So we'll talk about chapter 1 and what it does here shortly. But as far as this goes, it is interesting. I do think that for me, it was a little separated. Like you said, either one of those choices. Like, it's not really like laugh out loud funny. But on the other side of that, the tension isn't really strong either. There was a section, the line, "This is all going to happen in real time," and he's walking down to meet it, eyes wide open. And before that, it was talking about there's not going to be violin strings, ratcheting up the tension, no camera to cut away. That line did get me a little bit because I'm a weenie. And I was just like the idea of just having to walk down the steps. I was like, oh, for a second, I didn't like that thought at all.
Exactly. And that's what I'm talking about in terms of just not making a commitment to the horror or the comedy. Because if he had stayed in that moment, it is a terrifying moment by the nature of itself, just the idea of it. But by then immediately pulling back out, you don't get to actually feel that fear and put it into that scene. We're back to comedy. We're back to the glib monologue.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe I will be proven wrong, but I actually got the feeling that he's trying for more horror than comedy and just trying to maybe characterize this character as someone who's a little more lighthearted or glib. I don't know, that there's I've heard so many arguments about whether you should include a prologue at all, and most of the time it's not justified. To me, especially with that line that you mentioned about walking down to meet it eyes wide open, it feels almost like just an excuse to get the title in there.
Yeah.
But I did like some of the phrasing. I liked the damp air wrapping around his naked legs, like he's climbing into a pool of icy water. The description of the smell, the environment once he finally actually gets down into the basement, I thought was a highlight of the prologue. But yeah, I'm more interested in getting into chapter 1 and seeing where the story really kicks off, because I think that is going to give me a better idea for what to expect.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, to me, this did come across just like that first scene in the slasher movie where somebody dies horribly and then it's just cut away and then we, cut to normal life. And I think actually looking at the next page, sneaking a look ahead, that's kind of, it looks like what happens is just kind of jumps into normal life with our protagonist. No. I'm so
cheating.
Sorry.
Don't spoil it for me before I read it. It doesn't matter if you looked. Don't tell us.
It just says the first line is heart.
Don't tell us. No.
Anyway, not telling you. My point is that that's how it came across to me. I think that, like you said, Jack, it really should have probably picked a lane. And I actually have a little bit of a different take on it than you, Jess, as well, because I think that instead of it trying to be a glib character, I think it's trying to fulfill that promise on the back that it will entertain and appall you in equal measure. And so I think what we're actually seeing is the writer is trying to walk this line between having a rather humorous tone in the prose, contrasted against sort of horrific, gory things happening on screen. So we'll see if that, because I think that's the promise we've been made. And that's kind of how the prologue came across to me, as that's what it was trying to accomplish.
It is possible to have a book that does in equal measure the comedy and the horror, but to be blunt just from the prologue, you need to have prettier prose for it. If that's the line that he's choosing to walk, I don't have high hopes.
We shall see. Any final thoughts before we move on to chapter 1?
I was just thinking when you were talking about that, balancing that line, I like I said, I don't really read a lot of horror, but I love horror movies. And if I'm looking for something that's going to walk the line of like humor and horror, I'm looking for something like The Cabin in the Woods or maybe Scream, although I think Scream is a little more on the comedic side. And so, yeah, we'll see. We'll see if that's what he's trying for. But
I'd say the movie that best walks that line for me is Ready or Not.
yeah.
You're still terrified for her the whole time, but also it makes a joke of how incompetent the murderers are and a lot of her reactions.
Yeah, that's a really solid comparison for what maybe is being attempted. And I don't think the prose is Ready or Not levels of accomplishing that, at least based on the prologue.
See, all I can think of is Scary Movie, and now I feel like a pleb. But I didn't really like Ready or Not. I know I received so much hate for that, but
Sacrilege.
sorry.
Heathen.
Our Lady and Savior, Samara Weaving.
Bless her. Bless us all. All right, on to chapter 1 for Jess, me, and the heathen.
Nobody asked you. Okay, so moving on to the first section, the hook. These are going to be our impressions of the first chapter. So writing style, world building, characters and characterization. We want to know if the intro fits the genre. And then we're going to go over the question of, would you keep reading? So starting off, as far as first chapter impressions go, now I'm going to caveat this a little bit because this does read like it is written by somebody from a European country. So there are some isms in here that it took me a little bit longer to get, and there's just a slightly different way of writing that it took me a little bit to get into as well. It does read differently than the prologue. It's much more, I would say it shoots much straighter than the prologue. The prologue had kind of a little bit of over the topness in the narration, and this really doesn't. It's much more straightforward, and then I think the charm is supposed to come from our cast of characters. They're supposed to kind of get along. It seems like there's a good number of them. I think 7 altogether by my count. So, it's setting up just kind of like you would expect for a slasher. You have all these friends. They're about to get drunk together. And, from here, we expect that it's going to go downhill. I don't know what the expectations of the genre are in this regard, but I do not get any ominous sense at all. Like, other than the house being an old house, which doesn't seem like an anomaly in this region of the world, it really doesn't have much for tension or anything like that. Now, thinking back to every slasher I've kind of halfway seen, it usually the beginning does start off fairly slice of life, day in the life kind of. So I don't think that's necessarily a problem, but I do want some hint of something early on, and there's pretty much nothing. We literally, at the start of the chapter, we get introduced to the town, and then we get introduced to 4 of the characters that are at the house where everyone's going to be collecting. The 2 guys are already wanting to start drinking. The 2 girls who are there are also going to start drinking, and I think one of them was smoking, but again, there was some parlance in there that I wasn't entirely sure about, so we'll see. And then we join the other 3, 2 additional ladies and another gentleman, and I think they're college age is what it's supposed to be, so or late teens, early 20s. And they do all kind of come across like that in sort of a generic 20-somethings way. But as far as things go, I think the world building is pretty strong. The characterizations, I would say, are fairly weak. just because a lot of the characters sort of feel about the same. And the writing style is fine, but it's one of those things where it was a little bit bumpy for me. But that could just be differences in writing between Europeans and Americans. So that could very well be a problem on my side. As far as the intro fitting the genre, yes, I think it does. But I don't know if I would keep reading at this point, just because there doesn't really seem to be much starting as far as the story goes. So I don't know about you guys.
I felt like these were a lot of characters to introduce in this short of a page span. I think to some degree you have to expect that with a horror, especially a horror this short, because you need a lot of cannon fodder for the big bad.
Oh, jeez.
But I did feel that the house and the environment was better characterized than the actual characters were. I liked some of the descriptions of the house, and I liked the fridge being devoid of anything but booze and a few sad salad items. But the characters overall felt fairly generic, like you said, kind of college-aged. They said some very, I guess, cliche college humory things, like been lesing it up again, and you've just got a thing for blondes and stuff like that. There are only a couple that kind of stick out. I think that it feels a lot like watching the beginning of a horror movie where they're trying to introduce a lot of cast, but a horror movie has the advantage of actually being able to see and kind of track everybody and put a face to everyone. And so for me to really start to care about the characters, I would need a little bit more in a book. I did think that the last line was very like trying to be promising. It's like they're talking about the house being the site of 100 fabulous memories and surely several hundred more to come, and we know it's a horror, so we know that's not going to be true. And I thought that was kind of fun, but other than that, I own the book. If I just had the book, somebody gave it to me, I would keep reading, because why not? It's not like a huge commitment. I would at least give it a couple more chapters, but it's not because I'm like, holy crap, I want to read more.
Yeah.
Okay, so both of you hit the nail on the head in that this doesn't seem like it was written for the medium that it currently is. This feels like it was meant to be a movie, and I would almost be willing to bet that the author sees it in their head as a movie as they're writing. Because in a horror movie, this is completely acceptable, where you have a cast of 7 characters in the first scene. You've got the prologue where some random person dies and we move on, not caring. Giant cast, and don't really have to characterize them, just know that, like, hey, we're about to get drunk and we probably shouldn't because this is the beginning of a horror movie. The problem is that those expectations of movie do not translate over to book. You can and often do have slow starts in horror novels, but there's always a layer of ominous undertaking with them. You get the barest hint of that in here when they point out the wrought iron fence with the giant spikes, because someone's almost guaranteed to fall on those. Like, they're pointing that out for a reason in this type of novel. But that's purely I do read and watch and consume a lot of the horror genre, and so picking that up and going, I bet that's going to come into play later. There's not an actual underlying tension in this first chapter. If you were going to skip it completely, it would end up more in the literary zone where they're trying to lure you towards something else. But again, that's going to have prettier prose. And all of the words that they use, literally just the words they choose to put on the page, are going to be more particular to evoking a feeling or getting you to like a particular character. Seeing this cast of 7 doled out in 3 pages at the very beginning tells me I don't even need to remember their names until we've killed them down to like 3. And I can just move forward, because that's the level of detail that I'm expecting from our characterization from here on out. I don't expect the pacing to be on point for it, but if I think of it as a movie, then I think that that's the pacing we're actually going to be looking at. I personally wouldn't keep reading it, but I really love horror. And so when a horror doesn't scratch that itch for me and doesn't show any control of either tension or recognition of what the reader would care about to cause tension. So, like, if they had focused on a single character here and how this character has hopes and dreams, then just the fact that we're in a horror novel could make us go, oh, I hope you live.
Oh no, you shouldn't have those.
Yeah. But there's none of that. It's just people who are going to drink and then to probably die. I will say that I agree with you all that there is a lot of good description in here, especially of like the house and their surroundings. So physical scene setting wise, I do think he did well.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's maybe trying to not give away like which character might be the survivor if there is a survivor by like not focusing on a specific character, but I don't think that's the right move.
So going to the question of characters and who we think might live or die, because I think that's a fun game that we should all play, is guess who lives or dies. I do think that Charlie will survive, and I think Now will survive.
Most likely.
Yeah, just because they're given the most amount of characterization in this.
Yeah, I do agree. I like because especially when it was like she's got a Scottish accent, but she looks Japanese, and she got probably more lines than most of the other characters. I was like, well, she's probably gonna live or be exceptionally tragic. I don't know.
Yeah, probably.
I am calling it now. The prologue is not like a happened before prologue. It is a preview of what's to come. I don't think anybody has died yet.
And I would say the opposite, where I'm gonna guess that's the twist, where the prologue is Charlie dying and whatever came into the house is not Charlie. Because he specifically talks about, like, he's the one that's coming back into town, and also he's the one that James said that James would be yelling at him, and so he does know these people, but we don't have any of our cast missing. So I think Charlie is dead, and whatever has come back is not Charlie.
All right, what are we betting?
You don't think it's Stanley? Stanley, I would say, is the one that is the evil thing, if there is an evil thing. Because he keeps to himself and he doesn't drink. And he's one of those mature students. So it makes me think that he's older than they are as well.
All right, we've got 3 different bets going. Jack says that it's going to be Charlie is evil already. Sarah says that Stanley is evil already. And I say that nobody has died yet. And the prologue was just a sneak preview at what's to come later.
Okay.
What are the stakes?
It hasn't shown that Stanley left. There was definitely someone in a house. And Charlie's the only one that left and was presumably at home. So I'm going to say not Stanley. But I'm excited to have something to be right about later. Or be wrong about. That's fun too.
Wow. All right. Well, so
as long as you're not right also.
Oh, I hope I'm right now just because of that. But
Jack has read more horror, so she's probably on the right track here, but I'm going to hang on to my theory.
I have a rant though.
Give it to us.
It's in relation to that, what you were just saying, Jack, about this really reads as though it is mimicking a horror movie. And it scratched on a little pet peeve of mine that has been growing and growing and growing. And that is this consistent advice to writers to write as if they're watching a movie. I think that has been so detrimental to writing as a whole because it ignores entirely the differences in medium between movies and books. Now, I get the, like, at a very surface level, what that's trying to accomplish. It's just basically a different form of show don't tell. But one of the things that I have noticed is in more and more writing, we get this kind of thing sneaking into the way that books are structured, the way that they're paced, the way that the prose is written. And we actually are lacking in a lot of ways the kinds of internality that you do need with books, that books are excellent for, because that's why we have the whole, like, the book was better kind of thing, because you get this inside snapshot of characters that you simply cannot mimic in a movie. all you can ever see is how they are reacting in the world, what the world is doing to them, and how they are speaking to other people. Like, everything in a movie has to be conveyed through visual and audible means. Whereas a book is accessing your imagination directly. So everything in it, it's somebody joked once, it's like we sit here and we just hallucinate for hours on end if you're reading a good book. But that's what it is, kind of. Like, you know, like you just sit down with this crazy little tome and hallucinate for a while and enjoy it. Like, but because of that, it's a completely different artistic medium, and it has different expectations. And that's one of the things that I think is kind of dying in the world of writing a bit, because there's nobody coaching that actually, no, you shouldn't write your book like a movie, because it's a different thing. And if you write it like that, it's going to suffer, if not collapse entirely. And it's just one of those frustrating things. I see it, you know, passed around so often.
Almost constantly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's just so pervasive anymore, especially with less experienced writers who haven't taken the time to develop their own voice and their own style of writing.
And I completely agree with that. I think the bigger thing being that no one talks about genre expectation across mediums. And it's, I think, the most prevalent in writing specifically, because most people nowadays are literate. They can write. They feel they need particular equipment or more skill or whatnot to make the movie, or more money so that they can actually animate the thing or whatever they want. But they physically know how to write, and so they settle for writing, hoping that someone will see it and pick it up and then make it into what they actually want. And nothing is ever going to be good if you're settling.
Well, that's depressing, but accurate.
The true horror of the night.
Oh, existential horror. I wasn't prepared for that. I thought it was just going to be a nice summer slasher flick. Yeah. Yeah, it's just one of those things, like, because I know that a part of what we're doing here is not just giving these kind of critical looks at books and how they're made and how they're functioning and all these things. But part of it too is
in the editing, in the factor of what would have made this book really shine. Like, no, we're not really liking it yet, but it could have been likable. Like, the premise could be interesting. Having this cast of characters could work well. And what would make this first chapter pop is important. A, being adhering to the genre that it's in, the medium that it's in, and recognizing how books can draw people in different ways than movies draw people in. Recognizing that we need a bit of that underlying tension in the first chapter, where maybe you have little lines about feeling that there's something in the air, or what, like, if they knew that this was their last night, then maybe they wouldn't have drank so much, or maybe they would have drank more. And then you can have that tinge of anticipation in with the comedy. There are a lot of ways that it could have been done to make this first chapter better. But I think the agreement with all of us is that adhering to book standards versus movie standards would be the first thing.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think my thought kind of was one of the things that we are trying to do here is show writers what books are doing, why they're doing it, and how to do it better. And somewhat for readers too, because I think a lot of times readers come into contact with these things and they may not like them and they don't understand why. And so it's just kind of arming people a little bit with those elements of this medium particularly, because this is the medium that all three of us have sunk ourselves into and invested our time in. And, you know, we've put our efforts into developing ourselves as writers, and we've all improved and grown a lot over the years because of that effort. I think there is a lot of advice out there, and there's a lot that's vying for people's attention and trying to tell them, here's, you know, the way the world works, or here's the reality of the thing. And the noise is increasing and understanding is decreasing. especially when it comes to some of these older forms of art, I think. So it was an important call out for me just because I really, really hate that advice, and I wish fewer writers would follow that. It's not a movie. You're not writing a movie. You're writing a book, so you need to learn how to write a book.
And ideally, people will listen or watch these videos and come away with it with just a better reading comprehension level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any more thoughts before we...
I'm good.
I'm excited to read more, not because I care about the characters, but because I'm enjoying this process, so...
It's fun, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep. It's great. And also, I want to say that if Jess is right, then I'm still going to vote that it's Charlie that's dead. So.
What if Sarah is right? Can we not entertain that for like 2 seconds?
If Sarah's right, then I'm wrong on all fronts. If Jess is right, I could still be right that it's Charlie. So.
The first death?
Yeah, the prologue death.
Gotcha.
Because I think that it's already dead. But if it is a death that's just later that hasn't happened yet, I still think it's Charlie. So, just want to put that out there.
She's like, I have a way to win regardless.
No, I can already tell you if it has or hasn't happened. Because the ladies in there are Sharon and Claire, and they are named people. So no, it has not happened yet. And it's going to be the one who dies, the one who's going down the steps right there, is going to be this first guy we meet, Luke.
I'm going to vote Charlie.
The theories are changing.
You guys suck.
Most of the time in a horror novel, especially with very little characterization, anyone that's told to be chummy or good or kind or funny is going to die. You only characterize them well so you can take them away, and that usually happens first. The only person that he gave any, good personality characteristics to is Charlie. Charlie's dead.
It's going to be Ryan.
Okay. Well, okay, now you're just making up stuff.
I still think we need stakes for this bet.
Okay, I would like a prime rib, if I'm right.
I was going to say filet mignon, but whatever.
All right, Jess, if it hasn't happened yet, then who do you think it is that's dead? That way we're all putting forth names and times.
I do think that it's probably Charlie. If it's just the first death but hasn't happened yet, I do think it's probably Charlie.
Okay.
All right, so you guys are on Team Charlie, and I am on Team Luke, and it's probably going to end up being James.
It can't be James because he said James's name.
Yeah, he said James would be at the top telling him that he's dumb.
Oh, did he? Oh, I missed that.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, then it's...
Okay,
it's
so Sarah's wrong. That's
definitely
nice.
Luke. It's definitely Luke. I do not know why you guys think that's Charlie. 100% that's Luke. Yeah, you guys are on the wrong train, and I will expect my filet mignon to be delivered right away.
Never.
All right. So moving on to our next section, the book. We have taken the time now to read the rest of it. and Jess won. Jess won our bets. Jack did not win anything. She's the loser of the entire bet. So it was not me.
I expect a filet mignon the next time we meet up, just saying.
All right, one filet mignon for Jess next time we meet up.
Filet mignon for Jess, and nothing for either of the rest of us.
Technically 2, because we both lost. So 2 filet mignons for Jess.
That's true. And we will just sit there.
It sounds like a lot of steak, guys.
You shouldn't have won if you didn't want it.
I signed up for a steak, not like one of those eating contests where you have to eat everything in an hour and get it free.
But that's too bad, isn't it?
I was going to say, though, that they don't have to be big. If we were cruel, we'd each get you the biggest one possible. But
that is fully what I expect.
You think
2
we're
40-ounce
cruel?
steaks.
Oh, I'm hurt.
Anywho.
I think we can give... So this is a little bit of an interesting book because I think we were correct in our assumption from the prologue and first chapter that this is very much summer slasher flick kind of thing, right? And so I think then kind of giving our overall impressions of, just kind of whether we enjoyed it, whether it kind of matched what we were looking for or anything. In brief, we'll go into the rest of the book in more detail here, but just kind of my overall impressions, it did match up to that. However, I did think that it failed in a lot of key areas that kind of took it from that area of this is a really fun read and it's just going to be this really fun story to like near the end, I laughed audibly, but it was just because it was so kind of outrageous, but not in a good way, that I was just like, that was kind of where it really lost the plot for me. And it was just, it kind of got into a level of absurdity that I don't think it really intended. So just overall impressions, it was like, it was fun. Like, I'll give it was fun. It was an easy read, but it's not necessarily something that I would probably recommend because I don't think it really does what it's promising to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would agree. Overall, I felt that it had some really promising elements to it, and it did have that summer slasher feel to a degree. But I felt that it didn't build tension in a way that actually made me feel like I cared what happened to the characters. It also didn't build up characterization for the characters in a way that made me actually care. And sometimes that is okay for a slashery thing to some degree, but it was too little here, I felt. So I had a fun time overall, but it's not something that's gonna stick with me. It's not something I would really recommend.
And I would agree with both Jess and Sarah. This very much felt like it was supposed to be a B movie. General horror slasher that has some things that are so nonsensical that you end up laughing. And the problem that, which we had stated before, it doesn't pick a lane. There's not enough absurdism throughout the book for it to land in that you broke the ceiling of disbelief and it stayed broken. Instead, it was just random bits of like, hey, here's a crazy, wacky thing that doesn't make sense, and then you move on without ever mentioning it again. It's the same with like the level of comedy that we saw in the prologue just doesn't really exist in the rest of the book. It's just random bits and spurts of, and now we're going to drain the tension. I do think in that same realm of it being a B movie, basically, it's a good hook for people who don't read horror to jump in, not be scared, but have read a horror book and jump out. I don't think anyone who actively enjoys the horror genre for the tension that it provides and the spooky feeling that you get would enjoy this book.
And I think a lot of that had to do right with the style of writing.
Absolutely. So with the style, there are, first let's recap that we have 8 characters here. 8 main characters, and that's a huge cast. 6 characters is a large cast. For 8 characters to be packed into the first chapter and beyond, and for us to try and relate to any or all of them is a monumental task. A big reason why this failed is the style of writing, one of them being the dialogue tags. So 8 people, huge cast, lots of round robins where we're just like, he's talking and she's talking and a different him and a different her and a different everything. And I usually love minimalistic dialogue tags, but in this we really needed to know who was talking each time. And instead, the author subbed in key words and phrases that characters would say. So you would have Luke constantly saying, my boy or my dear. And that's the only way that you would know it was Luke, but that meant that he said it almost every sentence. And it got really repetitive really quickly to the point that they felt kind of like a glitching NPC. The Scott, Naoka, was always saying we or I. And it was just, he took out easy name dialogue detectors so that we knew exactly what was going on, and instead just made these repetitive motions that made the dialogue feel even less realistic. Another really big piece, and I think the largest problem with this style of writing in general, is that there was a lot of white boxing with the world itself. And what that means is that he didn't describe the surroundings very well, if at all. There were definitely pieces of description where we would go in and we would get a huge multiple paragraphs of this is what the room looks like, or here is what the exact decorations in the bar are. But also for a lot of scenes, there was nothing. We didn't know who was there. We would be 2 pages in and then someone else talks and apparently they've been there the whole time. Or it's just they are in a bedroom and we don't get any sort of personality or arrangement or size from this room. It just is a bedroom. And that white boxing, the reason that it matters, because it's never good to have white boxing for a reader to stop and look around and realize they have no idea where they're at. But a major impact is that the world itself comes off as fake. We're set up in a college town, 8 of our characters being college students in college housing, aside from 2 vague mentions of assignments, 2 to 3, and a day where they clarify they didn't go to class, 1 school-issued grief counselor that doesn't come into play at all. We may as well not be at school. This would have made the same amount of sense, if not more sense, if we were just renting an apartment and these were the 8 people who live in this apartment building, renting it together for whatever reason. They don't use school or grades or student loans or living too far from home as a reason why they can't just leave. There aren't any other students, friends, or teachers who would have known and the deceased whenever people do die and popped by. No assignments are piling up. They do mention at one point, like, hey, my teachers are giving me some leeway so I don't have to turn it in right away. But you would still have some sort of worry because you're not getting it done, or you're doing badly, or you know that it just keeps piling up and you can't put it off forever. They don't have any of these feelings. There are no slipping grades, there are no questions of whether or not they should take the semester off. There's no clear schedule at all, and part of the lack of believability of this book was just the fact that there's no one outside of this little group that seems to be reacting to the deaths, aside from that general note of, these parents came and picked up the deceased items, and our teachers said we don't have to turn in our assignments on time. We do get a grief counselor, but human reactions are completely absent. And that it just feels like the entire world, like in the Coraline movie, just stops at the end of this house. And technically the bar.
Yeah, one of the things that I thought when we were starting this, just based on the prose and the way that was coming across, was that it was trying to do this sort of summer slasher flick with a level of absurdity. So this kind of mixture of absurdity and also this, kind of like over-the-top horror gore kind of thing with these, characters that you're kind of supposed to love to hate and all that, but with a literary style of writing. Because that's what it seems like it's trying to emulate with the lack of dialogue tags and these like very there's a term that people will use on the internet sometimes, like quirk-chungus kind of behaviors with people. And I'm sorry, but that's actually very accurate in this case, because it's like you have the one quirk, and that is the defining feature of the person. And unfortunately, that happens a ton in literary, actually, because people think that it's very deep. And it was also this just like, we have to show, not tell. You know what I mean? Like, we cannot tell you anything. There is no internality almost. And whenever we do get internality, it is so devoid of character and so separated from characters that it may as well not even exist. Like, it may as well be a narrator, but there is no narrator. Like, there isn't a narrator in the rest of this, really.
And I do think that you're right. And this is a great argument for telling and not showing, just because of how many scenes in this book seemed not to matter at all. They would give us one piece of information for pages of writing, because they insisted on showing this scene rather than just letting us know it happened.
Yeah, everything had to be shown. We will harp on this probably in every single review because of how pervasive this particular piece of bad writing advice is. But that whole thing of you should show, not tell, it has just defined the industry in a very, very bad way, because you have to be able to tell, and tell well, tell correctly, tell at the right times. And just like this over-reliance on everything should have this movie-like aspect where you're just watching it all play out. That defeats the form of the book. So why have a book then? What's the point? If I can't jump into my characters' heads and understand what's going on from their perspective and get this really intimate look into them that I just cannot get by watching somebody on a screen, what is the point of a book? But that's how it came across to me, and it was one of those things where I was like, that's not the right kind of writing style. I like it in some ways because it's sparse, and that does play well into this, but it just, the white boxing, the just showing everything to the detriment of the story, and then, like you said, the lack of dialogue tags and trying to define each of these characters, but there's way too many, and so we try and define them by this very narrow, you do this thing, you say that thing. It just made the whole book kind of fall apart, unfortunately.
Yeah, in addition to what you all have already said, I just had some add-on thoughts for things that drew me out in the style, like took me out of the book. For example, I found that none of the characters were particularly distinct, but for the longest time, James and Luke really blended together for me. I did eventually realize that Luke was the one who was always saying "my boy," but that bothered me a lot. Like by the end, I was
Sharon and Sadie too.
Yeah.
Sharon and Sadie, I could not tell them apart.
Yeah. But yeah, by the end, I was so sick of hearing "my boy." I also felt that really conflicted with like the chapter 2, which in retrospect was kind of a pointless chapter. Stanley just goes and people watches at a local cafe, and then the shopkeeper is, or the cafe owner is doing a 50s shopkeeper routine, he says, and he's talking similarly in a way to the way that Luke talks. And I was like, so what was the point of the shopkeeper routine and that being weird if one of your characters is going to have similar weird mannerisms that are literally just there so that you can tell who he is when there are no dialogue tags?
Mm-hmm.
I felt that, yeah, the pacing was very up and down, sometimes too slow, sometimes too fast. I hated that there was so, especially in the beginning, there were so few things we got to actually experience with the characters. We just get an afterthought. Like, oh yeah, she'd been having nightmares for a while. She had this weird nightmare last night. There were so few things that were actually in the moment.
Yes.
And when we did get in the moment things, I liked those. I liked that when they were, we'll call it possessed, when they were influenced, they had like the rotting breath. And I thought that was a good, like a thing that had potential, but so little of it was actually in the moment. So those things just really, they took away from the story for me.
And I definitely want to come back to that lack of in the moment writing, because I think it plays a bigger, I think it was a choice that the author made in order to write the story that they wanted to write, and I think it hurt the book a lot more than it would have helped it.
I completely agree. It really felt like a choice.
Yeah. So Jack, do you want to jump into the full breakdown? And the reason why we want to do this, because it's a novella. It's a short book. And just having that overarching view of what happens will, I think, give us the best jumping off point for discussing our individual observations and things like that through. But yeah, let's start with your breakdown of it.
Absolutely. So for listeners, I'm going to be throwing a lot of names at you. Like I said, 8 characters. And as we've also already said, they're not distinct. So what I realized is that you don't actually have to remember their names at all, only who is paired with who. Charlie was pleasant to everyone, and Claire was obese and liked Charlie. These are the first 2 deaths. Their pairings quickly cease to matter. Sharon and James are sexually attracted to each other. They're the 4th and 5th deaths. Stanley and Naoka like each other and start a relationship during the book. They're the 3rd and 6th deaths, respectively, though Stanley's corpse does attack Naoka, and they meet their true plot ends together. Luke and Sadie aren't interested in one another and are our last 2 survivors. They have the final showdown where Sadie lives. So, Charlie and Claire, Sharon and James, Stanley and Naoka, Luke and Sadie. If you remember that those are paired together, nothing else in their personalities or within the book for them as people really comes into play or matters. For the breakdown, we have the prologue, which actually takes place between chapters 6 and 7, where Charlie is killed by the evil spirit. Physically, the evil spirit kills him. That is important. Chapter 1, character introductions. Chapter 2, an eclipse is coming, The house had bad wiring, so the breakers often flip. Chapter 3, the eclipse occurs. Luke bashes his face on a nameless headstone. Chapter 4, Luke goes to the hospital. Nothing comes of that. Chapter 5, there is banging heard in an empty room. The house is cold. The radiator is not working. No one attempts to fix it or call the landlord or student housing association. This is a consistent marker of the evil spirit. No one will ever figure that out. They prepare to watch a movie. Chapter 6, the house is freezing. Food goes bad while in the fridge. Stanley and Naoka get together. Sadie gets a premonition-like bad feeling, which she ignores. Chapter 7, they watch a scary movie, making commentary about the banality of evil and how predictable it all is. They mention that they would leave were they in a movie, then proceed to never leave or explain why they don't leave. They find Charlie dead in the basement from the prologue. Chapter 8, Charlie is dead, seemingly of a heart attack. The EMTs take him away. Chapter 9, no one goes to class, as though class wouldn't have been cancelled if a student died in student housing. The evil spirit convinces or possesses Claire to kill herself. Chapter 10, Claire's family comes together to get her things. The evil spirit gets into James's head, telling him to say cruel things to Claire's mother. He does. Chapter 11, they think the house might be cursed. Stanley and Naoka are together. Stanley has erectile dysfunction. Everyone agrees to stay in the house for another month or two off-page. Luke, Sadie, and James go check out the grave Luke bled on, realizing it's on unconsecrated grounds directly outside the graveyard. Chapter 12, Sharon goes to counseling. She's having disturbing dreams. Stanley and Naoka research at the library and find occult practices did occur, often with someone being carved up while alive and having their organs, like the liver, used in a ceremony. They're supposedly buried in unmarked graves on unconsecrated land. Stanley and Naoka assume that the grave marker is the exception to the rule. The book confirms that disturbing the remains would cause the spirit to haunt them. Meanwhile, James has all of 4 tabs open on the internet and finds that a man in the occult used to perform coven rituals on humans and cut off their eyelids while still alive. Chapter 13, James, Luke, and Sharon share all the things they've been experiencing in hopes of learning from mistakes in movies and getting out alive. The decision to do this happens off-page. Luke wants to put his hand in a toaster. Stanley and Naoka return. They agree, based off nothing, that the one occult person they found record of is the person whose grave they disturbed. They jokingly suggest burning the house down. They agree to get a church to anoint their house because it'll take the least amount of time. Sharon asks Naoka about the bad things she's experienced, which are the same as everyone else's. Sadie says the ghost is trying to break their spirits. Naoka says she had the urge to jump off the terrace. They get home, all the lights are on, all the windows are open, and music is blasting. Chapter 14, Sadie nearly commits suicide by drinking Drano. Luke happens to catch her and stop her. They don't discuss this and do nothing to try and prevent similar occurrences in the future. 15, a reverend comes and anoints all the doors and windows. She tells them to think pleasant thoughts. Chapter 16, they all have a day out, then come home and see a cat. Chapter 17, Naoka is possessed. She has sex with Stanley, who can't keep an erection, then snaps his neck. Killing him somehow gives him a permanent erection, which she rides to completion. Chapter 18, no one's seen Stanley. Naoka hopes that her killing him was just a dream, but isn't sure. Chapter 19, Sharon talks with James, who's possessed. He knocks her out, puts her on the kitchen table, and picks out a knife. Everyone else hears this, but assumes they're having sex. The house is freezing again, but no one puts this together with the ghost. James paralyzes Sharon, via the knife, and starts to carve her up, cutting off her eyelids. Sharon wakes up and bangs around as best she can, making lots of noise, including screaming, though her mouth is gagged. He knocks her out again. Everyone else hears the banging, but somehow not the muffled screaming, and again decides James and Sharon are having sex. Naoka goes to check on Stanley and see if it was a dream. The body is quote-unquote gone, but there's also a looming figure in the background that she doesn't notice. James comes back to himself, eating Sharon's liver, and can't handle it. He kills Sharon in an act of mercy, then shoves his hands into the toaster. Chapter 20. Stanley's body holds his head up with one hand and somehow maintains his erection. Naoka tries to run. Stanley's corpse catches her and rams her against the terrace railing. Luke goes to check on Naoka, who'd screamed. Sadie goes to the kitchen. The lights go out, so Sadie gets a flashlight. She sees Sharon and James both dead in the kitchen and heads to the cellar to get the lights back on. Luke tries to help Naoka, only for Stanley and Naoka to both fall from the terrace and impale themselves on the fence. Luke gets possessed. 21. Sadie can't get the lights back on. She gets another premonition-like bad feeling and hides in the basement. Possessed Luke eats Sadie's eyes and gets a knife. Sadie searches the basement and finds paint thinners. Chapter 22. Sadie asks a question to make sure Luke being possessed means he can never come back, which we've repeatedly seen to be false. The evil spirit confirms he's just being evil for fun, hence the banality of evil. Then Sadie lights him and the house on fire via paint thinners. She runs, he stabs and grabs her as she runs, she gets away and climbs out the window. 23. Everyone is dead, the house is burning, the police are on their way, and Sadie has a cigarette. That's the whole book. You will notice that at no point do I say they argue over what to do next, come to different conclusions than each other, a group of 8 people, remember, come to an incorrect conclusion that doesn't serve as being conveniently obtuse for the plot, looking at the sex versus murder misunderstanding, or approach the problem with different levels of preparedness.
Yeah, that was a great breakdown. Yeah, and so I think as you kind of pointed out, and I we're not probably going to give a synopsis like this for every single book that we come across, but in this case, it's very important because horror is one of those genres where the structure itself and the pacing of the book are so critical to it that if that is off, you're just going to have it's going to flop. It's going to flop with readers. And that's what ended up happening near the end there for me. Like, most of my notes are, this is funny, but in a way that, like, I don't think is intended, and I don't know what to do with it. Like, it's just all of a sudden everybody's just getting killed. There's no mechanism for possession. That was one of the things where I was just like, how is the ghost doing this? Like, it just can hop into literally anybody at any point. I know it's like a slasher, and we kind of want the monster to be overpowered, but, like, I want the monster to be overpowered in a way that makes sense. And that didn't make any sense at all, because usually there's at least some element of human will.
There's a magic system in place.
Yes.
And this did not have any consistent magic system.
Yes.
They actually have 2 conflicting points where there is a scene where they're talking about how they think that the evil spirit is trying to break their spirits and that they think it's working. And this would imply that the evil spirit needs to break them down and make them feel very negatively in order to do something, which they do with Claire, but only really, well, Claire and James, no one else. And technically James was possessed before they did that. And so when they actually all get possessed all in a row and kill each other willy-nilly, this is after a multiple week stretch of peace where everyone is feeling much better after the anointment. So that contradicts itself, and it's unclear. And there is an equal contradiction in the spirit's connection to them, in that the book continually makes assumptions, including burning the house down at the end, which they say they hope that's what would fix it earlier in the book. There's no reason for it to be connected to the house. It was disturbed by them in the graveyard by a person, which is Luke, the last person who dies. But reasonably, it is haunting him and is getting to the people around him, which would also make sense as to why it saved him for last. But the entire book works on the assumption that the ghost is connected to the house, with no reason for that to be the case.
Yeah, it was really funny, actually, because when in chapter 3, that scene happens where Luke is really drunk and then, like, is looking at this gravestone, and then he just kind of, like, faints and hits his face on it, which I wasn't sure if I was supposed to take that as him passing out because he's so drunk, or if the ghost did something to him, in which case it's like, it was also this annoying thing where it's like, oh, you desecrated the grave and that's why you picked up this ghost or poltergeist or whatever it is. But if the ghost is the one who pulled him onto the gravestone, then it's like the ghost made you desecrate the grave by basically possessing you in order to possess you, ? And I wrote specifically, I'm disappointed that they pick up the monster this way. And I was just like, right now, there's just no nerves. There's no tension. And it's like, it's a creepy graveyard. Like, how can you flub that? I want to be a little bit nervous. I want to be a little bit scared about what might show up here, what might happen here. But this is like actually the start of the story. Like, there's no ghost until chapter 3. And I'm just like, I don't know. I think that's a little bit dumb, you know? Like,
I think it's really telling that you forgot that it was during an eclipse because that never
Yeah.
actually mattered.
That's actually true. Now that you point it out. Yeah.
That's fair.
Yep. I had completely blanked out on that fact.
And that's another bit, actually, the graveyard is another point where the lack of thought for making the world feel real, feel like it actually grew around the plot and around the characters that you have, really fell through. Because there's a singular grave, unconsecrated, that is so close to the graveyard that we don't even notice that it's not in the graveyard. This grave is from, I think, the 1600s, if I'm remembering correctly, hundreds of years ago. Somehow, in all of this industrial takeover and the towns being built and everything else, no one widened the graveyard just a little bit so that it contained all of the graves. Every single person who did anything just building in this city, from a business standpoint, went, no, leave that singular grave that is 3-4 feet from the rest of the graveyard outside of the graveyard. Usually, unconsecrated ground is going to be far from the graveyard to make sure that it doesn't expand into that.
Yeah, although I will say this may be one aspect of things being culturally a little bit different, because I think this is supposed to come across as like a wee older English countryside town. And I do think in those places, you do have a lot more of this like sort of older, untouched areas like that. So like that didn't ruin it for me, but it is one of those things where it does come across as very, very convenient, because I just don't think anybody would bury, especially in the 1600s or, whenever.
You're not going to bury your witch next to your loved ones.
Oh yeah, heavens no, not that close. If they had kept going out of the graveyard, and then like there had been like signs up to like, this is not a good place, don't enter here, and this is where we keep all the witches, you know what I mean? Like that would work actually, because I could see them having a separate place, because they would want to basically, because they were superstitious, keep all the spirits there. You know what I mean?
But if the entire town is more superstitious than they are money hungry as a general town setup, then that needs to be stated.
That's
regardless of culture.
Yes. No, that's fair.
It could have been really fun if, like you were saying, there was like a whole like section where they like put the witches and it's warded off, and they like went there intentionally because it's spooky, and people have done that before. It's a rite of passage. No one has ever gotten hurt before. They're like, it's not a big deal. It's just scary. But because of the eclipse and the spilling of blood, these factors combine to make spooky things happen, and that's actually addressed. That could have been great.
Yeah, but then I think you're talking about needing to clarify within the writer's mind, what is actually happening here. Because if the sequence is, we went into this unconsecrated ground, and because it was the eclipse, that weakened the restraints or something like that, and so this ghost was able to lure Luke in or something like that, and maybe he did bleed on it, but he couldn't have been possessed by the ghost yet. You know what I mean? Unless he can just get possessed by the ghost anytime. Then the blood wouldn't have mattered. Like, why would he have hit his head on the gravestone? But if he like pricked his finger on one of the thorns and bled on the gravestone and got possessed that way, then that would make sense. But it's just this lack of clarity around that magic system that is just going to, it's going to cause all kinds of problems. And then if it is Luke has gotten possessed and that has invited something into the house that's following him, then it needs to follow him outside of the house as well, because it can't just be stuck in a house.
And it did, like I said, it seems to be stuck in the house for no discernible reason. And I think what killed this book is a mistake that I see very commonly in newer authors, where the author refuses to let their character be wrong or have flaws. And one could argue that these characters are flawed in that they smoke and they drink and they curse and they have sex outside of wedlock. But those are just college stereotypes, not personality flaws. Anything cruel they do is pushed by the evil spirit. They research for a day, find all the information, and come to the correct conclusions with no second theories and no missteps. They never have any discussions before making stupid decisions, like staying in the house, where readers might be able to see them arguing or choosing incorrectly. We just skip to a scene where they have already made these decisions and move on. Because of this constant form of correctness, every bit of dialogue can be assumed as what's going to happen, which if you rewind and listen again to that breakdown, every single thing that happens in the end is stated in a previous chapter as something where they're like, oh, I hope this doesn't happen, or I wanted to do this, or I had this thought. All of them are correct. All of them are predictions. The single philosophical conversation on the banality of evil. That is, people wanting an explanation for evil only to find that it's just people enjoy being cruel, immediately told me that our villain, whatever they turned out to be, would have no ulterior motive and just like to be evil for the sake of it. In another book, this could be a point of wondering. With no characters giving any counter-argument and no evidence to the contrary, I could safely and correctly assume it was justification for the later reveal of evil for evil's sake. And this also ties in with the author's need to explain that they haven't forgotten motives, just that there isn't one, as we explicitly ask the spirit if they made a deal with the devil, and they state it's just for funsies.
You know what, though? As you were talking through that, something occurred to me, and I think that you are correct in that there is an element of not wanting your characters to be wrong that is at play there. However, I think that equally there is an element of this is how the writer thinks they are accomplishing foreshadowing. And that's pretty critical because in a lot of these cases, you'll actually see, because it dawned on me because I was actually looking at one of my notes in chapter 3 where they're talking about going to the pub and Sharon says, the slaughtered lamb. And it's like, I did a little LOL there.
I hated that. I hated that.
I said it was on the nose, but amusing. Like, whatever. But she's the one who gets slaughtered and eaten later. And so I am sure there's a lot of stuff throughout the book that whenever you go back and you read it, we were obviously pointing those things out ahead of time. Like, I picked up on that and I said, oh, she's definitely going to die. There's probably a lot of this that is baked in as foreshadowing, as nuggets that readers are supposed to pick up on a second read through. And it should be all like, oh, I can't believe I missed that. That's so much fun. Like, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? But what that ends up turning into then is because you're putting so much foreshadowing into your character's thoughts and words and behaviors, then it comes across as
spoiling the ending.
Yeah, that too. So I do think that's an element of it, though. That's not how you foreshadow, just so everyone's aware. That's not how you foreshadow. Foreshadowing, it has to be handled very, very carefully. And it really comes down to creating an expectation in the reader that this thing can happen because it's happened before. So one of the things I'm going through right now, because I'm the worst pantser in the world, is I'm taking elements that kind of pop up in later chapters and being like, oh, okay, I can bring this one up here and I can bring this up here, and then I don't have to bring it up there. I can just let the chapter kind of go on this point as opposed to introducing it here and then letting it go. So it's one of those things where foreshadowing is really just building up this continuity or this feeling of continuity throughout the book. That's all it really is. You're not actually trying to hint to your readers like, this is what's going to happen next. It's just that people are acting in concert with their own assumptions, with their own goals. And so that's what comes across as foreshadowing. So that's one of the big misconceptions that people have with foreshadowing, I think, is that it is this you're just putting future knowledge into, earlier portions of the book. And that will be a mistake every single time. That's the rant.
It was a solid rant.
It was a solid rant. On what you guys were talking about with the grave, what I actually would have loved to see as the reason that we desecrated the grave is we have these bunch of drunk college belligerent college students. I would have loved to see Luke look at this grave that has no name on it, super drunk, and piss on it. Make him do something that is him actively choosing to desecrate a grave, and then having to pay for it throughout the book.
Yeah.
Or somebody write somebody's name on it.
Yeah, they could have done it in lipstick even.
Oh, that would have been fantastic. An actual desecration.
Horror movies can definitely go two ways, the accidental upset and the purposeful accidental upset. But when you have this large of a cast, purposeful is always better because it draws us to a particular character and gives us a point where we're like, you did a thing, you need to make up for it. You need to try and make up for it. And in that case, he could have gone through and that would have been a plot thread where he says, hey, I know I did this. I'm so sorry. I will do whatever I need to do to make up for it. Does whatever ritual or whatever thing that the occult books say he has to do. And that's where the banality of evil comes in, where the spirit was like, you just shouldn't have woken me up. I'm not a good guy. That could have been a good twist versus evil's doing evil things and there's no reason, the end.
Yeah. Now there were a few lines, and it's one of those things, I put little stickies all over this book. Everywhere that I had something that was just an observation or, a bad thing. But there were at the beginning, there were actually a few little stickies that were about lines that I did particularly like, because like I said, there is an element of humor to this that I think is pretty funny. And there are some lines that are pretty good turns of phrase. So like, let me read a couple of these ones because they just made me laugh. So I really liked this opening on chapter 3, actually. Still, I know we're back there again. In chapter 3, where it's talking about them waking up with a hangover and all this stuff. And the line is, but as the day wears on, they begin to emerge from their cocoons of post-binge misery, and by late afternoon, the first few drinks have been poured. And it's just a cute line because it's just fun to imagine them, peeling themselves out of these little cocoons. There was another one where Claire comes into the kitchen, face puffy, eyes like piss holes in the snow. And I was just like, I don't think I have ever heard the phrase piss holes in the snow. But that I love it. I'm happy that it exists because I know exactly what that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
I have a little sticky note on that too.
It was a funny one. It's just like, oh my word. Because I think there was an element of trying to be a little bit on the extra crass side with this, which is fine. Like, I'm here for it. And there were places like that where it was perfect. It was really, really nice. But it was not enough. There just wasn't enough of that. My other two, really good notes were at the end of chapter 6 and in chapter 7, because it was characterization of Sadie. Chapter 6 was the only time in the book I felt a sense of tension, because weird things are already starting to happen, and I forget if this is after. I think this is when Charlie dies, actually. Mm-hmm. Right in between there somewhere. And Sadie is at, I think, the train station or a bus stop or something along those lines. And she is characterized as having a pretty rough background. And her gut is just telling her, just hop on the next train to anywhere and never look back. Do not go back to that house. There's this sense of foreboding. And I liked that because I was like, oh, does she go back? Does she not? The fact that she has this gut instinct, that's so great. And then there's additional characterization of her in the next chapter. But I specifically wrote in the next chapter, in chapter 7, because my chapter 6 ends, good tension with Sadie. And then chapter 7 starts, and Sadie's there watching a movie with them. And it's days or whatever later after this, and I said, oh, never mind the tension from last chapter. Sadie's just here, I guess, and now it's Tuesday.
And that is actually a terrific segue, because as we've all mentioned by now, they don't give us any explanation Like, you can't sit in the aftermath of an event, and you also don't get to be in the discussion before we make a big story-changing decision. And so one of the large parts is that they say, hey, I have a super bad feeling I should not go back to that house. And then we're not ever given a reason why we go back anyway. There's no just like talking herself down or moments of fright in the days coming that she then brushes off. And so my favorite chapter was actually 14. I thought that the scene where Sadie almost drinks Drano was done really well. The problem with it is that she tries to stop herself, and she has a background where someone in her family, or her mom maybe, committed suicide, and so she's like, they know that I would never do this to myself, and she really wants to stop, and she's crying as she brings the Drano to her lips, and it describes the smell of it and how she knows that it'll ruin her throat as it goes down, and it does it well. And then someone happens to come across her and go, what the hell are you doing? Don't drink that. And then she's able to get her body back, and they take the drink out of her hand, and she doesn't drink it. And then aside from a sentence, a chapter or so later, where they point out that that did happen, no one talks about it. Mm-hmm. No one takes the fact that you were almost forced to commit suicide as a reason to leave, including her. No one says it turns out that you can be possessed to commit suicide, go off on your own, and only each other can stop each other, so we should all sleep together. They just all go merrily off to their own bedrooms and move on with their lives. Mm-hmm. And that's a big part of the way that he has plotted this. The author has made it so that it mirrors a horror movie and characters choosing not to leave, but it doesn't make any sense that they don't leave. And I don't think that the author could come up with reasonable discussions in which they would stay. And so they just skipped over the discussion and went, we are staying an extra 2 months. And then bad things start happening, and no one discusses leaving again. Obviously, after you almost commit suicide, you would get out of there, or you would have some sort of precaution with everyone else so that it doesn't happen again. But that would ruin the book. How would you go about it if they're too prepared or smart, or they leave? And so they just don't have that discussion and don't bring it up.
Yeah, this book is the definition of plot convenience.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is plot convenience. I didn't spend as much thought on that as I should have, but I was so bothered by the fact that they went to the library to research, and they just went straight to witches, and that's just what it was.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't wonder what could this be? Something's wrong, but we don't know what. Where do we start? They just are already on witches.
Yeah. Did y'all notice too that it was the wrong people doing the different things? So it's the one people went to the grave site, and then they had given the information somehow to the other people without ever having run into them, and then they were doing the research on their behalf, and then it irritated me because it was a little thing, but it was just these guys don't even know what they're looking for, or that they are looking for something, and yet for some reason they're the perspectives that are at the library. It irritated me. But yeah, I have multiple notes of why would they go back though?
And that's one of the things where they could have really utilized their surroundings. They could have said, if I fail one more class, I will be kicked out of college, or I don't have a home to go back to. They could have said, I'll lose my scholarship. There are reasons that students would have to stay, even if they're scared, or in their youth feel like they have to stay. None of that is utilized.
I would have loved for that to be the case for most of them, and then have one, maybe two, who really, really wanted to leave but didn't want to leave their who's become a loved one to them, because they would be alone, and then they would be in danger, and maybe together they'll be stronger and can survive it. Anything to give them character.
Yeah.
Well, it's also one of those things though where we've kind of talked about, why is the ghost attached to the house? Because if the ghost isn't attached to the house, then yeah, your plot's fine. The ghost can get them anywhere. You know what I mean? Why does it all have to happen at the house? That seemed like a really unnecessary structure to it that really, really hindered it.
No, I would definitely agree with that. And it was... So I think that it's just that they were watching a movie with a haunted house, and everything that they mimicked in that was to the house. And so, ta-da, we have to mimic in our plot, in our book, whatever they saw and said about this movie that they watched in chapter 2, chapter 3?
Oh, is
anything that they said, anything that they talked about in the movie, which is chapter 7, happened. And in the movie, it was, oh, they're going to bless the house, and then it will, the spirit will back off. And then, of course, that's not how the movie ends, and so the spirit comes back worse than ever. And I think that was how the author made it important that they got the house blessed. And I just want to, again, draw attention to the back of the book, where it said, worse still, there seems to be no way of stopping it. They tried one thing. Mm-hmm. And they tried the Costco version of a thing, where they looked around and went, what will require the least amount of time and the least amount of explanation? Let's hope that works.
Which is not taking it very seriously.
People are dead at this point.
Yeah, it's like, I'm like, how serious can it be if you're like, what's the fastest thing? And that we will not leave the house for. Like, if I fear for my life, even a little tiny bit, I take like extreme precautions. Like, there have been instances in the past where like weird people have come to writing group or something along those lines, and we've had to kick them out. And it's like, after that, I'm on guard for that person, because sometimes just like, you know, somebody just goes a little bit off the deep end, and I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want to be that person. So I'm just like, I can't imagine this whole thing. It's not just that people have died in this house. It is that all of them have felt the direct influence of this malicious being, telling them to drink Drano, telling them to stick their hands in a stinking toaster, like telling them to kill somebody and, you know, I guess fuck their neck stump. I don't know. But it's just one of those things. Like, I'm not making that up. That wasn't me. I think that was actually something that was in the book. Don't judge me for it. All I'm saying is that you have very direct influence. And you're like, yeah, I'm just going to stay in this house. That seems like a great option.
So, no one's neck stump got fucked, unfortunately. But there was an immediate erection upon death that never went down. It didn't make any sense, and it was never explained.
Someone heard of rigor mortis and was like, have you heard of it?
I can rigor your mortis.
That only applies to the penis, though, because it's important that not only does the rigor mortis immediately set in on something that was not stiff, but became stiff upon death and engorged with blood, not just stiff in general. But he has to hold his neck up whenever he's walking and as he's possessed as a corpse, because the rigor mortis didn't affect the rest of his body. His neck isn't stuck in position, only his penis.
I was willing to accept the ghost physics of his penis.
I want a segment called How Would I Fix This Book, because you guys talking about the movie and how the rest of the book is meant to reflect the movie is interesting, because it could have been played much better. It would explain why it was hanging around the house. If, like, it started with Luke, but Luke watched this movie and made this commentary, and the evil was like, all right, I can do that. Could have been good.
See, what I would have loved were these discussions where they don't realize they're falling into the same traps as people in movies. Like, we always look, just like they said in the book, that we look at these people in movies and we're like, you're idiots, get out. But then if they have these talks and they're like, I have to stay until finals. Like, I don't have a choice. Or I don't have any other house to go to. If I leave my job, then I have nothing to send back to my family. Or, you know what, I'm not superstitious. Like, sometimes heaters go out, sometimes fridges don't work. Come on, guys. There are lots of reasons why people would realistically do what they do in horror movies. And having them realistically fall into the plots that they made fun of would have been a really good book.
So they were trying for The Cabin in the Woods, but without the underlying, you know, the people downstairs who were trying to make them do the things, and so pump chemicals into the room and such.
Yes, exactly. And it's not like, so this is, like we said, it's very classic slasher horror. There's nothing really surprising about it. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. There are a lot of current horror novels that are doing well that are not in any way new or surprising to the genre. Let Him In by William Friend is the most recent one that I read. Not surprising at all, sold very, very well. as long as you make it seem like it makes sense, as long as the characters are doing spooky things and you're worried about them, the horror genre is pretty not easy to break into, but you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Well, the thing is, what this is lacking, though, is a source of constant tension or even, ups and downs of tension. There's just like no tension in it. The only tension I felt, like I said, was at that moment with Sadie. I guess I did have one other moment, and it was just in wondering what was going to happen with the priest. Whenever she came and was blessing the house, it was this whole thing, and it was playing it up. It was playing it up as like, ooh, is something going to happen? Is there not going to be anything happening? Like, oh, a door banged. Like, is the creature going to react? Is this going to spark something? And so it was playing on that trope in horror movies where it's like they try and cast it out, and for a second it looks like it's going fine, and then it's like, oh, it actually goes, wah, and bad things happen. And that's the technical term for
Agreed.
it.
Yep. It's in the dictionary.
Yeah. But the whole thing ends with nothing happening.
Hey, she saw a spider. That's not nothing.
Well, that's the thing. Is there is this moment where she goes to the bathroom and screams, and everyone's like, oh no, the bad thing has just happened. Like, because all the characters are anticipating bad things happening too. And then she's just like, oh yeah, there was a spider. I know they're one of God's creatures too, but I can't deal with them. I was like, relatable, but also it was a little bit funny.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, okay, yeah, this is a little bit funny. And there was a little bit of tension in it. And I was like, thanks. Good. That's good. Thank you. I appreciated it. Like, it was a nice chapter.
So I'd like to follow that with a moment that I liked, followed by a rant. A moment that I liked was when Naoka, before we realize that she is possessed, about to kill Stanley, she opens his door, and the scent of the anointed oil on his door bothers her. And it's not drawn attention to any more than it's just a bit acrid, or she just doesn't like it, and then she moves on. And so at that point, we still don't know she's possessed, even though looking back, that is a sign that it was the demon in her, or the evil spirit, that didn't like the anointed oil, but that's all that it did to it. I do like just that little detail of, by the way, she's possessed, but doesn't shove it in your face.
Yeah, I did not catch that. Good catch.
What I hated throughout the book is what Jess liked with that rotting breath, and it's specifically because we have multiple instances of people making out with someone who has that rotting breath, and for reasons, capital R, they just don't notice it, quote unquote, or are fine with it. Because of the passion, she didn't even notice. Because she was so excited, she didn't notice. If you have ever kissed someone with terrible breath, you notice.
Ugh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a pullback because your sensory, both you're smelling it and you're tasting it, and everything that tells you something not edible, something bad for you or rotten is in your mouth, makes you gag and pull back or scrunch or something. Even if you decide, oh, but I really, really like him, and I'm gonna kiss him anyway, it's fine, I don't want to hurt his feelings. It's a decision. There's no not noticing someone has bad breath and sticks their tongue in your mouth. Let alone someone has rotting, dead person demon breath and sticks their tongue in your mouth and you just don't notice. That took me out every time because I imagined kissing that guy and I noticed instantly. Doesn't mean I think he's a demon.
That could be really funny if it was like lower high school age. It is kids who just are like so horny. They just want to kiss. They just want to, dry hump each other. And so they're like, that's really gross, but I'm going to go with it.
Yeah. And it could even be a thing where it was like, if that was, like, they've had a crush on this person forever, and they're like, but for them, I'll deal with it. They could have made it funny. The author could have done something with it.
Yeah.
But to specifically...
Tomorrow I'll just sneak some breath mints into their bag.
Yeah. No tomorrow for you, unfortunately, but good idea.
Yeah. But I think that observation, though, of those little details, it shows that this author has the ability to do this well. It's just the execution on the macro details is actually where it's off. And that's huge. You know what I mean? Because that is where people tend to fail, which is strange because we I think there's an idea out there that the failure happens sort of at the line level or in the writing itself, but it's not. It is usually in those macros, in the characterization, in the plot beats, because that's where it's easiest to goof things up, to overcomplicate it for no good reason.
Or undercomplicate it in this case.
Yeah.
Yeah, or undercomplicate it, but also to miss your opportunities. Like not reading through your own thing and being like, I can do that better and here's how. You know, and that's part of why critique is so important, because we can sit here and we three can read it with our differing perspectives and we can pull out these different details that we each notice and say, this is a common problem that we all see. Here are various ways to address it, and then what the writer can do, and this is how you're supposed to take feedback. What the writer should do is think through those and then come up with their own solution that is better than all of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think that some of the things that I mentioned that I liked, well, I only really mentioned the bad breath, I guess, but in my notes I also put that I liked that when they were under the influence of the evil, that they were kind of mentally there, but just off. They felt the influence too strongly. It kind of felt like them, kind of didn't, and they just couldn't control themselves, and it was wrong, but they maybe couldn't put a finger on why. And I think that I liked those things because they were the only consistent things in the book with regards to how like the magic worked. If somebody was under the influence, they had bad breath. If somebody was under the influence, they kind of knew it, kind of didn't. And that was the only thing that was actually consistent. Like even how people died was like at the beginning Charlie is killed by external forces and then everything else is from inside.
Exactly.
I guess I was just clinging on to the things that I was like, that could have been good because at least you were keeping it together at that point.
Yeah, although even that, I did have a couple of notes where I was just like, I didn't think that it came across consistently or super strongly, I guess. So like the moment that Jack, you called out with Sadie, almost drinking the bleach and all that, my note on that chapter, because it's only a page and a half, I said it doesn't last long enough and isn't close enough to the character's experience, because it really didn't feel to me like her body was running away from her. And it's kind of actually mirrored in kind of a different way with the scene with Nauka and Stanley, because I didn't feel Nauka in there at all. And it was one of those things where it's like, okay, so up to this point, when somebody has been possessed, they have had a little bit of their own awareness. And we don't really see her in that at all. It feels very detached from her, and it very much feels, especially once you realize what's going on, like there's a complete separation between her and the ghost. And so it was actually one of those things where that was frustrating because she had a full personality take over. Sadie did not. And it was just, again, a moment of inconsistency. And that scene specifically, that one I really didn't like as well, because it came right on the heels of this one chapter that was 6 pages or so after the house was blessed, where everything's nice and hunky-dory. And then instantly Stanley's dead. And for me, I actually wrote like LOL, and this was one of the bad ones. And I was just like, I don't know what I'm supposed to think or feel with this scene. It's like it too quickly broke the tension of when, because again, we're starting to play with tension. We're starting to get this little buildup of, stuff's happening. When's it, because when is going to happen. And it was just one chapter, and boom, Stanley's dead. Fuck to death. Like, it's just...
I hear a lot of men want to go that way if they're going to go.
And that makes a lot of sense, especially with the characterization. So, a couple of things. The suicide, near suicide in 14 with the Drano. One of the reasons that I like it is because that page and a half is the correct length and correct pacing for holding that level of tension. The problem is, as you've actually pointed out in the author's writing, where there's no setup and there's no reaction, the chapter itself should have been like 6 pages, because it brings us to that point and it gets us scared before we're in the moment of almost doing this. The actual set of, we are here, we are pouring it, we are doing it, that is a good length for that. It just was missing the rest of the chapter.
Yeah. That makes so much sense.
I do think that the author also went too heavy on making sure that we knew for sure someone is possessed by always choosing to be in the possessed person's head, especially because the choice of which character you are in when you have a larger cast, even a medium cast, but especially a larger cast, impacts how the readers take it, because you're telling us what to focus on. It would have been a much different scene if we were in Stanley's head as this woman that he thinks he might love is starting to have sex with him, and he's flagging again, and he is mortified over that. And then she starts insulting him for his erectile dysfunction, and that level of like, he doesn't know what's going on with her, and he's trying so hard, and he is mortified with himself and embarrassed, and then he sees that she's going to kill him. Like, that is such a low moment to die in, that if we had sat in his head for that death scene, it would be an entirely different chapter than being in her head just spewing out insults and then break his neck. The feeling is different.
Welcome to another installment of how we would have made this better.
Correct. And for the tension, you would want to be in the victim's head, not the attacker. That's what's going to put your readers on edge, and that's what's going to make your readers go, please don't do this. And on the flip side of that, we needed a lot more characterization from Naoka to believe that she just went, oh, that's a dream. God, I hope that's a dream. I'm not going to check because I'm too scared to know. That is a super particular reaction that we need prefaced earlier if that's going to be such a large plot point that we go an entire day without anyone finding this body solely because she, remembering what she did, doesn't want to go check.
I think I would have been more forgiving of that if it had been in his head, because then you don't know what she was thinking or how well she remembers it.
Well, that actually just in general, though, because that's kind of the start of the climax, is when she kills Stanley. Because, like, after that, it is just bang, 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 bang.
Absolutely. Everyone dies in that day.
Yeah.
She kills him that night, they wake up, and the next day, well, the next night, technically, everyone is dead.
Yeah. Well, and so I literally wrote on the next thing, I know dumb protagonists in horror are a trope, but with everything going on, it's very dumb that they're not worried about Stanley, because they note his absence and they're all kind of clinging together a lot more because of what's been going on. And then they're just like, oh, Stanley's just hanging out in his room again, back to normal.
So my note on that was actually that all of the characters, they have a mob mentality for sure, but they move on way too quickly. This book takes the approach that a person only genuinely cares if someone else dies if they were close to them. And you see this with Claire, and you see this with Charlie, where it made sense that Claire is so torn up because she was secretly in love with him. But we were just friends, or Stanley was like, oh man, that's wild for a day or two. But then he moves on because they weren't even really friends, they just happened to live in the same house. If you go to a school of hundreds of people and someone died on campus, it hits you because then death becomes a real thing. It doesn't matter, especially if you lived in the same house as someone. If you see them every day, it doesn't matter if you're close or not. That death strikes you. And this book pretended that it didn't unless you were very close, and by very close I do mean romantically involved or wanted to be romantically involved with that person. If you weren't in that category, then you did not really mourn their death, you just felt a little numb.
Yeah. So I think the climax should probably be discussed kind of as a whole. Are there any additional items from the general plot leading up to this that we need to discuss? Just kind of any sort of like writing notes, anything like that?
So this is not necessarily a note that needs to be said in terms of actual, like, the story or the way that it plays out, but I hated so much the use of an ellipses in quotation marks.
Oh no.
To mark that someone did not respond.
That
is where I wrote my only LOL in the book, and it was a bad LOL because I don't write that.
You just gave me a traumatic flashback, thank you.
Yes, if there is a pause, if someone is not responding, that's the part where you show, don't tell. Show us that what they are doing instead of responding, that they are ignoring, or that they are specifically not responding, or that they are not listening, Are they busy? Whatever it is, not someone speaks, and again, we don't have a lot of dialogue tags here, so someone speaks, quote, ellipses, end quote, someone speaks again. It's the best way I can say it is just that it's not professional. It doesn't feel like an actual book. It feels like a manuscript that someone hasn't edited that out yet. When I see that, I don't know, quote.
It comes from somewhere. Like, I feel like, do you see that a lot in like webcomics? Is this someone who read a lot of webcomics and was like, that's just normal for writing a book?
I actually am going to go on the record as saying I think that might be a little bit of a Europeanism.
It is possible. It is possible. I do read a lot of books from English authors. In fact, if I count my top 4 favorite authors, they are all from Britain. I have not seen that in any of their books. So it's not that it's not possible that wherever he is from specifically, and his his region could do it. But I read a lot of general Europe and Britain, and that I have not seen that.
Yeah, and I mean, there's nothing really like in kind of a cursory search, there's nothing that comes up about it. That's how I wrote it off, because I was just like, there are going to be a few eccentricities here and there. You know, it's one of those things like English is different, and there are also just like the way that, you know, commas are used and periods are used. It was just one of those things where I was like, I'm not going to assume this is standard. So I kind of chalked it up to that. But I have no idea. That's literally an assumption on my part. So it could be anything really. But I did have one.
Well, I hated it.
I did have one additional thought, actually, because I had the thought while you were talking about it, Jack. And then my thought went away into the rabbit hole forever. It was to do with choosing perspectives. And this is one of those things I think a lot of people, because you read a book and it has multiple perspectives, and then whenever you go to write your own book, you just write in multiple perspectives, and people just don't think about it as an element of craft. But it is a very critical element of craft, and it's a very difficult one to juggle. It comes across very flawlessly, I think, in some books, especially older books, but it is not that easy to pull off. So most writers should be sticking to single points of view until they're very, very comfortable with handling more. Because if you just have one point of view, you take a lot of the complication out of your story, and you can focus on other elements that you need to work on. Now, if you're going to handle multiple points of view, you need to think about what is the optimal point of view for this moment in the story. You don't just hop between points of view because I want to see what this character says over here. And you do not, unless there's a very good reason for it, duplicate the same scene over and over and over again from different characters' perspectives just because you want to see all their different perspectives. Because I've seen that before. I've seen it. And it's so indulgent. It's dreadful. But that's something that is so critical to think about, is just how are these serving? How are they functioning in the story? And so, in what way can I use these to execute the story better? Because people just handle them very willy-nilly. Like, there was no thought to, we're getting this person's perspective because of this good reason over here. You know what I mean? Like, that whole thing between the victim and the attacker in this situation. It's like, you're right. It would have been a lot better to get the perspective of the victim. There's a lot more tension in that. It works better for us, and it causes less complications in the story. Because like I said, I never got the answer to what causes possession. And there was a moment where I wrote, this is a very prolific ghost, because this ghost is it is in everybody all at once, it seems like. And it is hopping from person to person. Maybe it's in multiple people at the same time. I don't know. And it's just like, this ghost is somehow able to just possess everybody. And it's like that. Those kinds of problems, a lot of them can be traced back to poor execution of some of these core elements. So not picking and being judicious with what perspectives you're going to show means that you may cause problems for yourself later down the road when readers start to take that perspective and question because of it. So that's just a warning to people out there generally. You don't just throw these things around. You're going to dig yourself a hole that you're going to fall into.
And I would actually add on to that in a very similar vein. If you are starting out, you want to start out with a small cast. That doesn't mean that there aren't people at the bar and that you don't have friends that are outside of your friend group, or there aren't other people who live in this dorm, but that your main friend group, who you have to keep up with and characterize, is small. Having well-rounded characters who don't come off as crowding the page and hard to remember is very difficult to do. This book would have been better if it had 3 main friends, other people who lived in the house, and then those other people get killed off first, and then one friend who was kind of on the periphery, but as things escalate, joins the friend group. That would have been a much better setup and much easier for us than trying to characterize everyone the same amount all at once.
Or, not trying.
Yeah, that's fair. Last thing that's more of a question, I guess, for you guys. This is part of the white boxing, I needed a description of that toaster.
Why?
Because he stuck his hand in it. And I get that you stick your hand in it and you get burned. Maybe it's even a toaster oven. I don't know. It's just said toaster. I do not understand how you stick your hand in a toaster and somehow die from it.
That's fair.
I don't understand how you stick your hand in a toaster and somehow get scorch marks all the way up your arm. That's not how toasters work.
No, it's because there was a key element missing.
The
A
bathtub.
fork. No, the fork.
And maybe that's it. I genuinely thought that whenever she stumbled upon him, I thought he was still alive because I couldn't understand how a toaster would have killed him. And then it wasn't until a later point where she pointed out, like, oh, and his corpse in there. Or the demon came in and looked at the 2 bodies. And I was like, oh, he's dead. Just because I don't understand how the toaster killed him. I know that was the urge that he had. I know that's what he did. I needed a description of that toaster to picture it in my head.
Okay, so I am woefully ignorant of, physiology and physics and electrics, but, the one thing that comes to mind is that they have, the 220-volt plugs out there. Does that make a difference? Is it just a more powerful toaster?
I mean, we also have 240 volts, so...
240. See, you even knew the voltage more than I did.
So technically, you can electrocute yourself with a toaster. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You would need probably a butter knife or a fork or something like that, because one of the things about a toaster is there are essentially you need to get to where the cord is meeting up with the heating elements, and you can electrocute yourself that way.
He does specifically just jam his hand in.
Yes. So that's the thing. He wouldn't just jam his hand in and be able to electrocute himself. He would be in a better state, honestly, if he got a butter knife and stuck it into the outlet itself.
Yeah.
That's a much more likely way of dying. But technically, yes, you can electrocute yourself, but not that way. So yeah, that was.
So just as a clarification, I didn't miss anything, right?
No, you did not miss anything. That was an inane death. Yes.
Yeah, I was so confused when it turned out he was already dead.
I liked how you said he'd be in a better state.
Well, to die. He'd be in a better state to die.
Yeah. I assumed he was just sitting there with burned hands, just welded into the toaster, as it said, and that the demon type evil spirit was just going to waltz in, see him, and be like, oh, I guess I'll finish that off, and just casually kill him or whatever, because he's clearly out of it done. Or something.
Yeah.
But... that's all. That's my last thought. I was very confused, and I'm still confused, clearly.
Since we're talking about things along these lines, I have a couple of things. Not to that degree, because I just was I give up at that point, I think. But I was bothered when they specifically mentioned that there were, knives missing from the knife block. And I was like, this is a really weird point to mention that without it being significant. But I know at this point that it's not going to be significant that there are missing knives from the knife block.
Yeah.
I was bothered by that. I was bothered by this moment in, what chapter is this? Chapter 11, when Sadie wonders, just for a moment, what her life would be like without the demon drink, which always seems to give with one hand and take with the other. I felt like that was so preachy and came out of nowhere and did not fit at all.
Yeah, it was a pretty line that didn't end up mattering.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they were constantly drinking in the beginning and then using, specifically in that therapy session, using alcohol to cope, but it never really impacted their decisions or feelings or school or work at all.
Yeah.
They just did drink for college reasons, I guess.
Yeah. They could have been more susceptible to the demonic influence when they drank, and that could have been cool, but also, based on what we have here, I don't think that that would have been handled well either.
Yeah. Okay. So, my final thoughts are final. Are your final thoughts final?
My final thoughts are as final as they're going to be finaled.
I have one final thought.
One more final.
And I think this is actually a truly final thought. And you guys already brought this up. You mentioned the Sharon calling it the slaughtered lamb. And you were like, that is so on the nose. She's definitely going to die, etc. I was so confused at that point because I didn't immediately catch on that she was just being, catty is the wrong word, but she was just saying, like, this is a shithole, right?
Facetious.
I didn't catch on to that immediately because just the characterization was not strong enough. I just was like, that's a weird name. Oh, never mind. And then eventually, like, later down the page, I got that was what was going on. But then later, toward the end of the book, there's this line, well, either that or burn her to a crisp, but it has to be worth a go, and what's the alternative? Wait around like a lamb about to be slaughtered? And I was like, oh, so that's why she said that, so that we could get this line later.
Yeah.
And that's like my first little sticky note and my last little sticky note in the book.
Well, that's nice at least.
Well, okay, so with that as your final note, final, we're going to move on to the last section, which is the climax, the ending. Not with a bang, but with
I'm going to say whisper.
a whisper in this case?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say a chaotic yelling jumble, possibly with feces, monkeys in a cage throwing feces
so you're
around.
describing the book and I'm describing my reaction. It's just a very soft sigh from deep in my diaphragm.
See, mine was also a whisper, but instead of a soft sigh, it was a, what the fuck?
Right, so 3 different endings we've got.
Yep.
And none of them are a bang.
Yeah, so I don't even know where to start with it.
Did the end make sense? And I mean not in terms of physics. Let's ignore physics like the author did. I mean in terms of considering the events that were strung together in this book, did the final event make sense when it occurred?
That's not a fair question. The things leading up to it didn't make sense. Why would I expect the ending to make sense?
And that is in line with my answer, that it made as much sense as anything else. They said earlier in the book that burning the house down to get rid of the spirit was an option, and it's what they did. And so, based off of everything they say being exactly what will happen, the house getting burned down absolutely went with my expectation of how the book would end.
Yeah, I mean, it went from, like, the pace was, I know it's like one of those things where it feels like this is a really niche kind of topic to discuss with it, but the pacing just wrecked me because it felt like we just suddenly started throwing everything we possibly could so that we could get everything done as we wanted it to be done. And then it was just like, I didn't know why the ghost was doing what the ghost was doing. I didn't know why the people were doing what the people were doing. And it literally just felt like we were on this really bad theme park ride. And like it was just flashing lights and colors, and occasionally like a little pyrotechnics fire would shoot up right next to you, and you'd kind of be like, what, where did that come from? Because that's actually water right there. And also like it was a chaos that was very it was uncomfortable, but in a bad way, as some of the things where it's like, yeah, I laughed, but it was not a good laugh. It was an uncomfortable chaos because it it just felt like we went from nothing kind of happening, or things happening in at least a fairly laid out way, to it literally becoming like an entire slasher movie where everything kind of happens in a night and everyone's just kind of dropping like flies, but all happening within 4 chapters.
And that is a classic level of the tension and pace getting upped in a slasher book. The problem is actually something that you noted previously, in that we went from calm, happy day, anointed house to, and now suddenly we're murdering someone. Stanley is dead. The buildup is what's missing there. There should always be some sense of foreboding and 1 to 3 chapters, honestly, of ominous build where we know something is coming. Even if we can't, we as the characters can't articulate it, there is something in the air that says we should leave. Something bad is happening. There are signs that people are ignoring or missing that the reader is picking up on, and none of those exist. And so it's basically like we went from the base floor to standing on a platform and there's no ramp. That uptick is good for the genre, but not without any build.
Well, and it didn't make sense. That was my bigger problem. It was just like things were happening, but I couldn't string together the sequence of them or why they happened in a particular way. So it's like Nauka is being attacked by Stanley's dead corpse that is possessed upstairs. And then downstairs, we have James, who is actively murdering Sharon, slaughtering her. But that's kind of happening at the same time?
Ish. There is, I did get confused in that too. It seemed like it was happening simultaneously. There is a line in there that has never been in any of the other ones. But for James, it says it takes him a while to come back into himself. Paraphrasing there, but something in those lines where he's eating her liver. And he's still doing that even though he is no longer possessed, because it takes him a bit to regain his senses. And that is the entirety of the explanation that we get as to why he is still doing these things in this room whenever we have now possessed the corpse upstairs.
Yeah, it felt dumb. It just felt really dumb. Like, it all was so, I'm going to make up a dumb word, happenstantial.
Nice.
It was very forced.
Yeah, because it was just like, I want to have my dead Stanley coming back to life and attack. I want to have that scene. And I want to have this scene where it's all grotesque and he's, taking her apart on the kitchen table. And then I also want to have this scene where I possess this kid and he's hunting her down through the whole thing.
I was fine with everything except for Sadie going into the basement after finding the dead people and being like, I need to turn the lights in the house back on.
That's one of my bookmarks.
2 more people are brutally murdered in the kitchen. You leave.
I hated that.
Or you shout for your friends, and then maybe you can get drawn up if one of them is possessed and says, please, I need help, or whatever else. Like, he's coming after me. Whatever. You could get drawn back into the fray, but you're not going to go try and turn the lights on.
I want to just read that really quickly, because this is immediately after.
Please do.
It's one of my bookmarks. This is immediately after she finds them in the kitchen, and she actually has the, we'll say, understanding to say, dear God, James, what the fuck did it make you do? Which is the first I think we've actually heard out loud acknowledge that the entity is making them do things. Followed by, then the distant sound of breaking glass snaps her into action, and she decides that, like it or not, the electricity has to go back on. Whatever Luke's dealing with upstairs, he won't be helped by the darkness, that's for sure. So with a heart that couldn't sink any lower without falling out of her asshole, she goes and opens the cellar door. I hated it.
Well, and then at the beginning of chapter 21, where she's so blasé about this. Like, she goes to the breaker, she tries to switch it on, and it springs back to the off position, and she says, Jesus wept. I guess he totally fried the wiring. I'm like,
I marked that too.
What? What do you mean? And then the next page, I have a really fun note. It says, WTF? We get to be in the monster's perspective? I didn't want that. Because yes, then we jump to the monster's perspective. In what is it, Luke? Is Luke the last one standing?
In Luke.
Yeah.
Yes.
So in Luke's body, in his head, we see the monster, but it's like entirely the monster. It's like just the monster's thoughts. And it's like, why am I here? Like, it just drains all the things.
So it does. What I assumed is the justification for that is that the monster specifies that, oh, I shouldn't have possessed that dead body because that drained a lot of energy, but I guess I still have enough to do what I need to with this one last person. And so I think it was specifically supposed to tell us, like, hey, I'm less powerful than I was because I did that flamboyant corpse possession bit. It doesn't really make a difference because we're not given an upper or lower levels of the evil spirit's power limits, and so to say he's less powerful now or he's weakened makes no difference to us. There are no rules. There are no rules. But I actually noted the Jesus wept line as well, and I was taking that as a marker of the author's writing ability and style, because earlier in the book I did say that the way that he writes dialogue is good. Not the dialogue tags and not the continual my dear boys, but the general phraseology feels very casual. And even whenever she speaks, that's a very casual way of speaking that I could hear someone saying. And the problem is it stays that level of casual no matter what is happening. The way that they talk never changes, never gets more stressed, never gets shorter, never stops being witty, no matter what is happening to them. And so while it was a strength at the beginning, it turned into a weakness at the end.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, I really don't have much to say about the ending. Like I said, it's thing happened, and then Sadie escapes the house after setting the ghost on fire, who's, also her friend, but, he's doomed anyway, so we're gonna just set him on fire, set the whole house on fire, and get out, I guess. And so we got out, and we're just gonna sit there with the house on fire and a bunch of murdered people in the house, which definitely the police would not look at you, sideways about. They'd be like, oh yeah, just the whole house just burnt down. Yeah, they have no way of telling that this person was carved open on top of the table before the house burnt down. It's just so stupid. She would be in prison because she's literally the only person to point at, and ghosts aren't real. So like,
but we don't. That's another moment of not going into reactions. The book ends, for listeners, with her standing outside of the burning house with a faraway stare, smoking a cigarette. And I think it's based off what the EMT says, even. We can look at that. The very last paragraph of the entire book. For the authorities, the truth of what happened here will always remain something of a mystery. Sadie will cooperate as best she can, but they will be left with the feeling that some key information has been withheld. And in years to come, the first officer on the scene will tell the tale of 13 Cromwell Lane, of the bruised and bloodied young woman he found at the garden gate, cigarette in hand, watching the blaze with wide-eyed wonder.
Weird.
It ends on a kind of, and now it's over, note. It doesn't say whether or not they believe that she murdered them, or they let her go, or she went into an asylum, or anything else. Just that they feel like they're missing some key information.
Yeah. Yeah, and my note at the end was, well, that was an anticlimax. It should have taken a lot longer. This is a bad writing style for this type of book. Like, but I think it is, like, that's a very simplistic way to put it. I don't think it's necessarily, like you've kind of pointed out, it's not necessarily longer. It's dwelling on the correct things and having the build-ups and letdowns happen appropriately.
I honestly think it could be an interesting book if we added in the rest of the book. It feels like we're missing entire chapters of build and release, where we say, hey, this is happening and we feel that we should do these things, and then we see them do it, and then whenever something bad happens, we react to those things and change our plans based on the bad thing that happened. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I feel like if you just put in all of those pieces throughout the book, it'd add like 10 to 20,000 words, and the book would be better by a lot.
Yeah. Although I will say, because I was just gonna, kind of make the comment that that could be an argument for this shouldn't be a novella, this should be a novel. But I think there are plenty enough places where we're not doing anything. The words do not serve. I think you could do it in this format. It's just that you have to be far more judicious about what goes in and what goes out. And there's just so much wasted space.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Part of that is just there's just way too many characters.
Yes.
Like just focus tighter in on a core cast and you could use the words a lot better.
The ghost doesn't even exist until the end of chapter 3. Like, there's 3 whole chapters where there's no ghost. There's no anything yet. And I mean, I get that. Like, you're starting out in the real world and then scary things start ramping up. But like, well, surely we can at least have the inciting incident happen in chapter 1.
Yeah, I would have loved it if Luke messed up and called the ghost, did whatever he's going to do to disturb the grave, all on his own during the eclipse, just drunk, belligerent, whatever. And then the other people who happen to be staying with him, with the ghost attached to him, get wrecked. Mm-hmm. And then they have to figure out what's going on based off of this guy who's always drunk's memory, because someone did something, because there's now something bad in the house and it didn't used to be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep.
The potential is there.
There's a lot of potential. It's usually the problem. There's a lot of potential and it's not.
It needed a genuine developmental editor, not friends and family.
Yeah. So I think a lot of our questions are like, did the end make sense? Was it satisfying? And then the last one is, does it make you want to read more from this author? And I wouldn't say the ending does. I would probably read something else by this author because the writing style was fine. And I just do think, though, that I would hope that some of the bad ticks in the writing, so this is I guess my theory of why I would pick up more. I would hope that some of the bad ticks in the writing were because of maybe an unfamiliarity with horror, and then also with trying to keep to the novella format. So because of those constraints, maybe not presenting the best thing you could present, but maybe in a different genre, the style could work really well and it would be a little bit more fleshed out if it were in a novel. So if there were a novel by this author, I would probably at least pick it up and take a look at it.
I would be cautious. I do see promise in this author's writing, but there's also a lot of things that just did not work for me. But I have seen authors improve tremendously. So I think I'm not typically someone who's going to go read the reviews of books, but if I saw something else by this author, I think I'd go look at reviews to try and determine if it seemed like they had improved on their technique and style, and if it seemed like a significant improvement, I'd give it a shot.
I would be willing to read another book by this author that they wrote 10 years from now. I think they need a lot more practice. They have enough potential that with practice and with actively trying to get better, with getting good feedback and then taking that feedback, they could definitely turn out something that I would enjoy. But it's going to take years of practice. So whatever they write in 10 years, I would give a chance.
Well, are there any additional thoughts on the ending or wrapping up the book or, just burning statements that you must make on record?
I will say that I'm glad that we chose this book to read. It has a lot of mistakes that early writers make. And anytime I say early or newer, I don't mean the amount of time that you are writing. I tend to refer to skill level. And it's just because it could be someone that's 80 and it could be someone who's been continually writing since they were, I don't know, from 16 to 40, but has never gotten feedback and so never worked toward any level of improvement. They feel like a newer writer in terms of churning out an actual product, not yet understanding the reasons that things hit particularly well or badly, or how readers take things, why certain beats are important. And with the idea that we, as the critiquers, want to touch on how to make books better and why certain writing doesn't land the way that people hope it would, this is a very good book to be one of the starting of our series.
Well, Thank you, everyone, for listening to the entire video. If you've gotten to this point, please do remember to like and subscribe, and we will remind everyone that we do accept submissions, so if you would like us to review your book or your first chapter, we will also be accepting full unpublished books as part of our book medium series. So if you are fine with us discussing your book in full, and that includes plot spoilers and things like that, on the channel, we will give you a full edit of your book, a full developmental edit of your book. We'll also call out if we do see typos and things like that. And you can look for the submission instructions in the details below. If you do choose to submit an unpublished book to us, just understand that our critique will be very different. In this, we're doing more of a review of something that already exists. In those cases, it'll be much more like our first chapter breakdowns, where we will be providing editing details to you and a full step-by-step breakdown of the developmental editing notes that we would give you. So it will have a different tone and tenor. So, and if you have any questions about that, please reach out to our email and we'll be happy to answer those. Now, we are going to, before we adjourn, we're going to select the next book that we will be reviewing in our Over the Fourth Wall series. So I'm going to spin our random number generator here. So here we go. We're spinning.
The suspense is killing me.
Oh, it landed on 11. Okay, wonderful. So 11. 11 corresponds to There Will Be Thousands by Alexander Robb. So that's going to be our next book.